So you have actually purchased your property. However, you're not really sure which or how or what tips do we actually have for you as a first-time landlord.
Landlords, this one goes out to you, and you.
You're reminding me of that song.
Level, do you know, I remember when we started our journey, the thought of being a landlord, like it freaked me out, man. And I know that we're not the only one. So if you are in this case, please do hit the comment section below.
I think the biggest thing that I was actually thinking about is the myths that actually go around, right?
Let's hear about it.
So people would say that as a property investor, the rules or the regulations are more favorable to the person that's actually renting the property than the person that's owning the property, right? So now that was one of the biggest myths that I have actually heard. And now if you're really not informed about what actually happens in the space, it then becomes really scary. Now, please address that myth.
I remember how young we were going into this field. And then our tenants, it was a family. Like there was a father, there was a mother, and there were 3 kids involved. Of course, just looking at it from that perspective, it's already overwhelming. Not even looking at it from the law side. However, what we did, that was quite smart, is that we did not invest alone. We're always speaking about never go into property investing alone. Always have a power team. So if you actually want to discuss more about this, how can we add value to your journey, hit the link below on Calendly. Just like that, the meeting is set.
So now tell me, right, with the situation that you are in right now, can you please dive deeper into it? Because I know it was a really interesting one, right? So just to give you some perspective, what had happened is that we had actually purchased this property. However, the rents were too low. We couldn't actually break even. We're actually breaking even.
No, it wasn't. Breaking
even
doesn't exist. You know that with income versus expenses when it comes to property, it will not sit at zero.
So it was a bit above what we would actually be running at a cash flow negative. So now we don't want to be in a situation whereby we are taking out money from our pocket and giving it to this property. Remember, every time when you're investing in a property, you should be the one receiving money and not you being the one that actually takes out the money and gives it to the bank. So now tell us a bit about how you actually handled that situation.
It was overwhelming, man. I still remember the meeting that we had the night before. Like, how are we going to even tell them that rent is increasing just because we went in? And looking at, we didn't even have the lease agreement from the previous tenant. We didn't understand the pros and cons of inheriting a tenant. It was crazy, man. It was really overwhelming. So now it was the 2 of us with that family, and then we like, you know what, rent needs to go up.
They didn't even offer you tea, man.
So what we did is that the first thing that we saw, that we need to understand the market that we're investing in. And then we noticed that the market is actually renting out at X amount. So if we are seeing that our tenants are giving us X amount, then we are able to actually discuss with them that how about we actually, okay, it wasn't even a discussion, man. It wasn't a discussion. So we actually put it on the table that, you know what, this is how much that we'd like to put on the table, that this should be.
Now, can you please give us like a ballpark in terms of the numbers so that it really goes down? It doesn't have to be the exact
rent was 4,000.
Okay.
And then we wanted to increase it to 4,800.
Okay.
For it to make sense for us. So it was going to increase with the whole $800. And I think that rent had not increased with them. They've been living there for the past 6 years. So it didn't increase for the longest of time. So now here comes these 2 guys. They're like, guys, you know what? Yeah, we need to discuss the price. And you know that it does get emotional with the price. How were you feeling on the day?
So the feelings that I had in mind is that I am a property investor, yes. However, I'm also looking at it from their perspective that these 2 young guys are actually going to tell me that I need to actually pay more rent in front of my kids. I feel like that was the daunting part, because you know what? Looking at it from a respect element, that finances wouldn't be something that you'd actually speak with someone that's really older than you, right? It would be something that you'd be speaking with somebody that is around your age. However, now we're in a situation whereby if rents don't actually increase, we will be holding on to this bad property. So what we really needed to do for it to be beneficial for everybody, because we know that we're really good landlords, right? I think we're really good landlords. They get the good landlords, and now we are able to actually get our money on a monthly basis. Because now, if you're looking at a rental strategy, it goes back to how much are you actually getting on a monthly basis. That's what was going through my mind. And now I'd like to quickly address this factor that the law rather favors the tenants rather than the investors, right?
Yeah.
So now, if you have a contract that is actually written down by the conveyancer, when I'm speaking about the contract, I'm speaking specifically about the lease agreement. If you have that in place, it becomes easier for you because you're both binding yourselves to these rules and regulations that are in that particular contract. So now, if you're in a situation whereby the tenant doesn't actually give you the deposit, we already know that the lease agreement can't actually start, which means that the tenant can't actually go into the property, right? So now, the lease agreement actually stipulates everything that should happen when it should happen, right? So now the problem is that if you don't have the lease agreement in place, it then becomes a problem. So I'd like to swiftly go into point number 2, and I'm going to throw it at Nell. So we're in a situation whereby the lease agreement has expired, and now the tenant has a deposit, and now they've been living in this property for the last 3 months. Nell, how did you handle that?
Man, with inheriting of tenants, there's a lot to actually take into consideration. Number one, the deposit, actually, before we even get to the lease agreement. Sometimes you find out that the deposit is with the previous owner, and now the previous owner goes AWOL. So how are you going to deal with it? Number two is that if it's maybe with maybe if the deposit is with the management company, now how are you going to get that deposit? Because now the thing is, these tenants have already paid the deposit. So now it will be unfair of them to actually pay twice. However, at the same time, it's unfair of you as the new landlord not having a deposit, because if anything does go wrong, then whose problem is it?
When the tenants leave, who's going to pay the deposit?
So now that's the first stage, is looking at it from a deposit perspective. Let's look at it from a lease agreement perspective. So now, especially when you are inheriting a tenant, if you're inheriting a tenant, you need to be very careful with the previous lease agreement in place. That what does it really mean? I would rather get a conveyancer on board, suspect. I'd rather get a conveyancer on board. Let them explain what it really entails, so that if I am in trouble, I can actually maneuver around it. Because now if I don't understand what's happening in there, and then I'm like, but I do have a lease agreement that's got a lot of dust, only to find out that it doesn't cover that point, then I'll be in trouble. Then let's go to the other point when it comes to having no contract at all, and then you are inheriting, or let's just say that you are taking a tenant in. So now the question will be, if anything goes wrong, what will protect you as the landlord? Even if your rental is 900 bucks or 600 rand, you still need a lease agreement. Don't look at it from a perspective whereby it's only the guys that are charging 10,000 to 15,000 and then I'm sorted. You'd like to protect your business at all costs.
I think that's where a lot of people have a problem, that they don't have a lease agreement, yet they're doing things illegally, and then they end up saying that...
What do you mean illegally, man?
I'll explain. So now let's speak about this illegally situation, right? So most of the time what happens is that if you don't have a lease agreement and now your tenant is giving you problems and they don't want to vacate the property, you do not have a lease agreement that actually stipulates that how should the tenant leave the property. So now what you end up doing is that you end up taking out all of their belongings and putting them on the streets. Number one, that's illegal. You can't do that. Number two, you lock them outside or you change the locks. That's not legal. So you always need to follow the legal procedure, because now the problem is you might get away with that once. However, the next time you might find a conveyancer that's in that property, and now they might live in the property and actually sue you for actually putting their things outside, because some of the things might actually get damaged.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that you really need to consider, that if you do have a tenant in your property right now, make sure they have a lease agreement.
So the last point, before we actually get into the last point, a fun fact. I remember the first time we were renting out, the landlord didn't want to give Lebo the rental back, the deposit back. How did you feel about that?
That was one of the worst landlords that we've ever had. So the landlord didn't want to actually give us the deposit, but now at the end of the day, it was about that do I really want to fight this landlord for this?
Wait. Was there a lease agreement that you signed?
There was no lease agreement. Now, point number 3.
Okay, point number 3, when it comes to deposit. Once you get the deposit money as a landlord, it's very important that you save it into a interest-bearing account. Actually, it's law that you do that, because the tenant can actually ask after some time to ask you that how much interest have I actually gained from the deposit that I actually gave you. Trust me, you do not want a tenant that knows the law and they'll leave you for 6 to 7 years. After that, ask you that, hey man, how much interest have I actually gained from that? So you'd actually want to be ahead of the game, save the money, read the lease agreement, and also understand the laws, that what protects you as the landlord and what puts you at risk as the landlord.
From my side, looking at that particular point, right, I know as landlords, when we do get money that actually comes from the deposit, we want to spend it real quick to actually fix the things that we needed to fix in that property.
Or now, even at home.
Even at home, you're trying to fix something real quick, right? Or the kids needed money for school fees. So now the problem with that is that if the tenant actually comes back and is like, what was the interest-bearing account that you had actually looked into? Then if you don't have the details to that, they might actually take you to court, and that's the last thing that you'd want to happen. So what I would actually advise is that go see a conveyancer as soon as possible. Once you have the conveyancer, explain to them your situation, that you are a property investor and you have a deposit of X amount of money, and then give it to them so that they are able to actually invest it as soon as possible, because the last thing that you want is money sitting in your account. I know when money is sitting into my account, I'm already planning that, what am I going to buy with this?
The next event.
Most definitely. Moving on to the next event, on the 30th of April, we will actually be hosting another event. So make sure that you do book your seat right now. It will be at the Irene Country Club. I'm really excited about that, man.
So the people that will be having is Tabo the accountant, and then we'll be having Lebo the banker. It's going to be epic. Trust me, value for money. Then we'll also be having yours truly speaking about affordability and how the interest rates actually affect you as a property investor. Best make sure that you book your ticket today. Invest like a pro.
That's not